Hello and welcome to the India Energy Hour. I am Sandeep Pai, a former journalist with Hindustan Times and now an energy researcher at the University of British Columbia.
And I'm Shreya Jay, journalist with Business Standard newspaper in Delhi, writing on the energy sector.
Together, we are really excited to co host a new podcast on India's energy transition, the India Energy Hour. This podcast is hosted by 101 Reporters, an innovative news agency that connects grassroots reporters and media houses to bring out untold stories. The show is produced by Tejas Dayanand Sagar of 101 Reporters.
In this podcast, we want to unpack and document India's energy transition. We will interview leading energy, development, and climate experts from academia, civil society, and the government. Through these interviews, we will explore the most pressing hurdles and promising opportunities in the energy transition unfolding in India. We will examine the role of government, finance, social justice, and science. Over time, we will feature other countries of the global south as well.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently announced that rapid expansion of the natural gas based economy is a must for the country to become an Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliant India. However, in the past, the natural gas sector in India has seen very limited growth and is marred with both supply and demand side issues. In our third episode, we spoke with Swati D'Souza about the prospects of a gas based economy. Swati is one of the top experts on oil and gas in India and is currently working as the research lead on climate change at the National Foundation for India.
Thank you, Swati, for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure for us to have you here. One major reason being that we don't find much women in the energy sector. You know it well. So we are delighted to have an energy expert as good as you and also who happens to be a woman. So thank you for accepting our invitation and joining us here. And we can't wait to discuss so much about the lesser known gas sector in India. So let me first start with you. We want to know you. Where are you from? Where did you study? How did you enter into this complex sector of gas? What made you enter into it? So just roll on and tell us about yourself, please.
Shreya, Sandeep, thank you very much for having me on this podcast. I think it's commendable that you guys are doing this podcast because it sort of unravels the energy sector in India, which is complicated to begin with, and puts it in layman's terms for people who want to understand it, not just students in India, but also people outside of the country. So thank you very much once again for having me on the show. I was a student of journalism. I studied in Mumbai. I was a broadcast journalist. I was a news producer until 2014. I worked at ET Now, where I produced the 8 p.m. and the 10 p.m. primetime shows. I never really wanted to be in news for a very long time. One of the reasons was because I thought TV news especially did not dig into the surface, did not dig beyond the surface. And I'm very used to, or I had always wanted to dig beyond just the first layer that we spoke about, that TV shows you. So research was a natural sort of push from there. So in 2014, I shifted to Delhi. I started working in Terry. At that point, when I had just joined Terry, my sector focus was coal. There were very few people working on coal in the sector at that point in time. Also, I looked at the coal supply chain and I stopped from when it went to the consumer. So for the longest time, for 2 years, basically, I did not look at electricity, but rather all the way from extraction to supply. Once that took a while. So Along with that, I also was working on hydro. So these were my first 2 years at Terry, following which it was actually Dr. Mathur, when he joined Terry, one day came up to me and asked me about what is happening about methane leakages in India. And I was like, sir, I have no idea what is happening about methane leakages. So he said, you have 1 month to prepare on this, because there was a voluntary guidelines being signed by a bunch of multilateral organizations to curb methane guidelines. So Dr. Mathur basically gave me 1 month to be like, read and tell me everything at the end of 1 month. So I said, fair enough. That's essentially how I got into natural gas in the first place. Once I did that, then we also started working on research related to gas to try and understand why gas. It was also the time when uh, Minister Pradhan had spoken about a gas-based economy along with Prime Minister Modi. So there was a lot of curiosity about what is happening on the natural gas side. So, and given that I was already working on coal, and this also termed as fossil, so it was a natural progression from there. And that's when I started working on gas. And then, of course, later on in 2016, 2017, it was when I started working on electricity, given coal and gas and the usage on electricity side. Following that, in 2018, I shifted to Brookings India, which is now CSEP, where I worked on a book to look at what can be the potential roadmap to increase natural gas consumption in the country. That book is due out in in March actually. Um, and now I'm at National Foundation for India, where I'm helping setting up the climate program.
That's great. So let's go back. I'm interested in how you really transitioned from, from journalism to sort of like was it like a shock from working on TV and producing shows to sort of like starting to research these very technical and detailed subjects. Can you talk a little bit about the transition process?
Sure. So my master's was actually in global climate and energy policy. So I had some academic background on it. But after my master's, it was in 2011, and we were smack in the middle of the global financial crisis, which had just hit India. So job markets weren't really great at that point, which is why I entered TV to begin with. But the transition was actually not very bad, because I mean, Sandeep, you've been a journalist. Shreya, you are a journalist. There is something that journalism teaches you, is to pick things up on the go, irrespective of whether you have a background in it or not. You learn to pick things up as you go. You learn to understand new concepts in really short period of time. And what it also does is it also helps you identify this crucial, the questions that most people are not thinking about. So that sort of wiring helped me transition, so to speak, in coal, because it makes you very curious. And as an analyst, you are supposed to be extremely curious about every policy that comes out. And journalism teaches you that, like, be curious, learn to dig more. So that was basically the transition. I had to pick up a bunch of concepts along the way. I had to understand a bunch of technical terms. I had very good mentors and guides at Terry, actually, because there were a bunch of distinguished fellows who sort of helped guide me through the process, who helped me understand the political economy of coal, so to speak. And also who sort of pointed me to reading material and research questions that I wouldn't have thought of. So it was a good transition.
Okay, and one interesting question is that, like as Shreya said, that it is a male dominated field, right? Be it in the industry, be it especially the sectors you look at, fossil fuels. It's like, I don't know who was the last, CMD or MD of any coal company or gas company. So it's pretty much a male dominated sector. Many researchers are also sort of male. So how do you navigate this space? Like, have you ever felt that people sort of not demean you, but like, don't take you seriously? Or what has been your experience in that regard?
So, in addition to being a male dominated sector, it is also a sector that is filled with engineers. So invariably, the first the when you end up meeting people from the sector and when they quiz you about your background, um, some of the ones who are more old school go like, "Oh, you're not an engineer, you will not understand these concepts," uh, and then you have to be like, and then you have to sort of work your way to gain their confidence, saying that I do like this. This works. I can understand it, and over time then they start trusting you. So it is a slow process. There are actually, in my interactions with the industry, especially on the oil and gas side, I have met a bunch of women within the sector who are incredible. Like they're working in, as you said, male dominated fields, but they're doing really well. So it's it's changing. Like I'm not saying if you see the male to female ratio, it's abysmal, but it's changing. But given that we are moving away from fossil fuels, and renewables is a sector that is more open to having women in the entire supply chain, I think they're moving in the right direction.
It's a natural question. When I started researching the energy sector, first as a journalist, now like, in academia, uh, from the beginning, I have heard that natural gas is a bridge fuel, right? It is a fuel that will substitute coal in the short to medium term, and while renewables are sort of really getting ready and getting cost competitive. But it seems that the gas sector has not taken off in India in the same way as, say, it has taken off in other parts of the world. Can you elaborate a little bit about that? Like why, like get into the history of things and why it has not taken off? What have been the challenges and so on?
Okay, so first let us talk about this term bridge fuel. This term bridge fuel was coined or came into popular popular lingo somewhere around 2011, 2012. The reason for this is at that point, shale gas, the US started producing shale gas in massive quantities. And it had begun the cycle where it would stop or or reduce its dependence on imports from the Middle East. Um, it was also the time when we were looking for alternate sources. It were solar module prices had not yet crashed, so and everyone knew that coal was polluting. So, given this scenario, natural gas seemed to be the most viable option to shift towards, given the fact that it was a lot cleaner than coal. It had usage in power, heating, transport, in industry across the board, and supply was increasing in the international market. So this is where the idea of bridge fuel started coming into existence. A number of um, power plants across the world started shifting from coal to gas, um, or rather, the share of gas in the electricity mix started increasing. Given this, everyone, let's say there was a global rush towards going into gas. This is where the term bridge fuel came, because people didn't know until then whether renewables would be a safe bet in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, in the next 15 years, because China had just started entering the market on producing solar modules, which led to a crash in prices. This is where the idea of bridge fuel came about. So in India, we had started looking at gas from the 90s and early 2000. There was KGD6 was discovered somewhere in early 2000, and GAIL had started building its pipelines from 1986 onwards. Most of our gas actually went to the fertilizer sector. With KGD6 coming into being, and the promise of more gas, a lot of plants that were earlier running on naphtha and fuel oil were also converted into natural gas. So in India, that's where the promise began. And it was a pretty decent promise to begin with. What then ended up happening was a combination of multiple factors. One was issues on the governance angle, one was issues on pricing, and lastly, issues on demand. And each of these were interlinked to the other. So let's look at it first from the demand perspective. Where is gas used globally? Globally, you have something called anchor consumers. What are anchor consumers? These are industries or sectors that have the most, that have a very high consumption of gas in their input as fuel. Why do you need anchor consumers? Because laying the capex for gas pipeline is very expensive. So to recover the cost, you generally need a heavy anchor consumer. In India, and globally, you had the power sector, which was an anchor consumer. You had heating. You still have heating. You have cooking. These were the three major anchor consumers. In India, we don't have heating. So we don't have consumer demand on that side. What we do have is we have power, we have fertilizers, now we have city gas distribution networks, but we're still looking at early 2000s. So there was power and fertilizer. Now, the 2003 electricity reforms opened up the sector, but it did not do much on the tariff side of it. So if you didn't have, so what would end up happening was your gas was competing against coal in the market. Until 2010-11, you had, until 2011-12, you had the domestic gas, which came from KGD6, which came from different gas fields in the country. This meant that your domestic gas price was competitive with the power with coal prices for the generator as well as the distributor at the end of the day. Once your supply of domestic gas sort of fell, then gas stopped being competitive against coal. This fall, if you see the gas production trajectory, happens around 2011-12 when we hit 60 billion cubic meters of gas. Following which we have dropped now. Today, now we are again back at 64 billion cubic meters, but of this, about 50% is imported LNG. So supply played a big role in determining where in being one of the key challenges for gas in the country. Because again, let me take it, if you compare it globally, all the countries that we are talking about, Europe, the US, UK, UK had its own supply, US had its own supply. China too has its own supply, but it has, since 2013-14, it has started coming into the gas market and importing quite a bit of gas. But China too has its own supply. Russia has its own supply. Russia to Europe, given that pipeline and the North Sea over there, all of them had their own local supply. With our local supply falling and the legal cases that happened around KGD6, all of that, there was a little bit of confusion as to where the sector would go from here. So that was one part of it. The second part of it was on pricing. So India has always wanted to develop a price discovery led market. What do I mean by price discovery? See, what we have currently, or what we have even under help for that matter, is price setting. Price setting is when the government determines through a range of mechanisms what the price of natural gas should be, instead of allowing the supply and demand in the economy to determine prices. We had been wanting to switch to price discovery since 2000. The hydrocarbon vision of which was released in 1999 sort of spoke that by 2020 we would have a discovered price market. But then there was other complications because we had multiple pricing regimes in the country. Pipelines, the spread of pipeline was not happening at the rate that it should have happened, or rather at the rate it was envisioned, and we didn't have domestic supply. Given all of this, India did not make that key transition to gas at a point when the globe was shifting to gas, or gas became a popular fuel across the world.
Good, you mentioned about this, when the globe was shifting, India didn't. I'm just asking out of curiosity, does it have something to do with India's own, geopolitics or trade ties with other countries? We did plan a TAPI pipeline on the same lines as Russia and Europe, but that didn't quite, go ahead with. So do you think geopolitics had a huge role to play on India missing out on this trend when the whole globe was moving towards gas?
No, not really, because what TAPI would have done is it would have increased supply. It would have increased LNG supplies. LNG supplies were already there. Our problem is not that LNG supply. Our problem is domestic supply and pricing. So the problem has invariably been that the consumption sectors are regulated. So, which then cannot compete with LNG prices. At least couldn't compete with LNG prices, then now can still somewhere compete in some sectors with LNG prices. So, geopolitics did not play a huge role in the reason why we didn't make the shift. To my mind, it was a combination of, delay on the policy front, delay in implementation of plans that had been put in place, say 5 or 6 years ago, delay in getting the sector to move as a whole, and a lack of a vision. Something that actually I think now is being corrected on an incremental basis. But we've had multiple documents that look at a vision on gas. Okay, all of them talk about supply should go up, pipelines should be set, infrastructure terminals should be come up. But this is all on the supply side. There is very little movement on the demand side in gas, and that is where the crucial problem has stuck, because we don't know what our anchor consumers are, because we missed a key window in power where gas could have been a fuel complementing coal and today complementing renewables. But then because tariffs were regulated and domestic production fell, gas couldn't compete against coal in the domestic market. It is a mainstay in the fertilizer sector, but that's because we need urea production in the country. But fertilizer is still it's just one sector, right? So it of like your total consumption mix, I think it's about 40%, but there's still a 60% gap. So I think these were the combination factors. Broadly, we didn't know whether how we would use gas in the market. So, when today there is conversation about a gas-based economy, when the conversation initially came, even I was a little skeptical because nobody said what a gas-based economy was supposed to mean. But there has been incremental movement along the way that tells you that there is a plan in place. This coherency was not available in the sector for a very long time. Therefore, I think we missed the bus.
Okay, that's fascinating. I have lots of questions. So
Go for it.
I think my first question is just for the benefit of the listeners. Can you just quickly, very briefly, sort of tell where gas is produced in India and which among the different production zones sort of saw, the supply issues, which, I mean, was it like KG Basin or the Gujarat, or like where did happen? And if you can get into some of those issues of what happened, that will be great.
We do onshore as well as offshore. Okay. A lot of gas is produced in Gujarat. A lot of gas is produced in Mumbai High. There is some gas produced in Andhra Pradesh, which is the KG-D6 basin. Um, there is there is some gas that's produced in Rajasthan. This is your onshore. Offshore is your Mumbai High basin primarily. Most of our gas today comes from the Mumbai High and the eastern offshore. So to give you an idea, we produce about 30 billion cubic meters of gas in the country. Of this, 18 billion cubic meters comes from our offshore, which is Mumbai High and eastern offshore. Okay. Both of these are old fields, by the way. They're not new fields. KGD6 was a new field, which is again on the east, which the production has sort of peaked. This is your map for gas in the country.
Could you mention the key names of these oil fields? I've been reading about these fields since the time I was in school, Bombay High and Eastern Offshore and even KG Day 6. I want to know, has India even put in that much effort in exploration? Can you tell us a bit about how, leading companies, ONGC, etc., explore gas, and compared to, global peers, how much do we fall behind when it comes to exploring new gas fields?
So the exploration and the production side in India actually goes back to independence. A number of these companies were British companies, which have then become Indian companies. When I'm looking at gas in particular, so there are 4 different regimes under which production has India has tried to increase its production. You have what we call the nomination regime. This was pre-1990s. Under this regime, what ended up happening was national oil companies like ONGC and OIL were the key players who were involved in producing. These guys would the Directorate of Hydrocarbons would mark blocks, and these guys would explore in these blocks to see first whether there is gas available. Once gas was available, then production would begin. Once it was available, there was a bunch of clearances that had to be taken, etc., etc., and then production would begin. Then we come to the pre-NELP regime. In this, what ended up happening during this regime was the government decided that you could have JVs, so joint ventures with private companies to explore gas fields. This is called the Discovered Fields Policy. So in fields where it was discovered, private players could go and extract the gas, sell it to national oil companies, who would then have bilateral gas contracts with different players, and it would then flow into the market. In 1990s, once liberalization happened, the idea was to open up the oil and gas sector, which is where we come to the NELP, which is the new exploration and licensing policy. So there were 9 rounds in NELP, right? Uh, with this, what the government decided was, okay, let's open up the production sector, the exploration and the production sector. So the first round of NELP actually got a lot of interest by global companies. I actually have statistics. If you will give me a second, I'll read out the statistics to you, because a number of players were interested in entering the Indian market at that point. So see, before we came to NELP, there were 35 ENP exploration and production companies that were working in the nomination and the pre-NELP regime. Of this, there were 5 which were public sector companies, 15 which were private, and 15 which were foreign. Okay. After the 9 rounds of NELP happened, this number increased to 117, which meant 11 public sector companies, 58 private companies, 48 foreign companies who were operators or non-operators or consortium partners. This was the spread of this was the spread in terms of the companies and the focus that went into exploration in India. What then ended up happening? There was so couple of things happened. One, the NELP rounds took a long time to materialize. Okay, for example, like the first NELP round took 15 months to be completed, but even the sixth NELP round took about 12 months. So, this longevity sort of made players start losing interest in the exercise. Then, when you won the bid, it took anywhere between 3 to 8 months from the period when you won the bid to the period when you could start, when you were awarded the bid. Okay. So that again contributed to delay. Then there was also the problem of clearances. Environmental clearance was a problem. Sometimes what would end up happening was the blocks were put on bid. The blocks were put to be bid. And then when you went for clearances, Ministry of Defense would not give you its clearance because it was near some site. So then all the effort that you've taken to actually go through the entire process went down the drain. So given this entire matrix, it took a lot of companies, actually, a lot of private companies, a lot of foreign companies, they lost interest in looking at exploration and production in the country. So what ended up happening? During NELP, a lot of your blocks still went to ONGC and OIL. But then, because of lack of manpower capacity, a number of these blocks were not explored. While they were explored, production didn't happen, or the delay in production took a while. Now, all of this basically contributed to a situation where we don't have enough supply. So this was the NELP regime, which then now which once we realized, or rather once the government realized that NELP wasn't working, another policy had to be put in place, which was the HELP, which is the Hydrocarbon Exploration and Licensing Policy. Now, under this policy, I have seen a lot of interest amongst the private players. I have spoken to a bunch of private players who believe that the process in which this is happening is a lot faster. And there is transparency, because the website that DGH operates on providing data out there, plus the mechanism by which HELP allows the companies to bid based on the data that is available, sort of facilitates the transparency in the process. So to my mind, it's a little too early still to look at the impact to do an impact evaluation of whether help has actually worked or not, particularly given that we've gone through a round of macroeconomic policies which are not conducive to investing more money in the sector. COVID almost has slashed everyone's budget. Before that, GST came into being, so companies were busy trying to revamp their system. Before that, there was demonetization. So a number of things have happened which may not have been conducive. So I think given another couple of years, we should then go back to see whether help has actually helped in increasing the production of oil and gas in the country.
Okay, that's great. I have one more question, sort of about, you know, the anchor sector. You briefly mentioned about city gas distribution. Could you
Yeah.
elaborate sort of on like where it stands, and uh, if the supply is, supply side is cleaned up and sort of the supply side is managed well, could that become an anchor sector?
So, as I'd already explained, an anchor consumer is someone who consumes enough gas that that the marketer and the distributor and the marketer is actually gets return on the pipeline that has been built. Um, India had something called a gas utilization policy, which was put in place in 2007, if I'm not mistaken. As per this policy, again, every part of the sector has been regulated. So I'm sort of unraveling each regulation and how now we've come to a not so regulated sector. So what did this 2007 policy tell you? It basically told you that whatever domestic gas you produce in the country will first go to the power sector, will then go to the fertilizer sector, will then go to city gas distribution, and then there were a bunch of other sectors, and then you had the non-regulated sector, which is your refining and your industries, etc., etc. This was changed in 2014 when the new government came in place. They decided to put city gas distribution right at the priority to get domestic gas. So now, coming to your question on whether city gas distribution can be an anchor consumer, yes and no. No, yes, because there is sufficient demand. There is a potential for sufficient demand in the country. The reason I say potential for sufficient gas demand in the country is because we need industries to shift away from coal. We need SMEs which consume fuel oil, which consume naphtha, which are extremely polluting fuels, which contribute to air pollution, to shift away from these fuels. We need public sector transport can shift away from diesel consumption and go into gas. So there is potential. Now I will tell you why no. This is very disaggregated, right? City gas distribution is very disaggregated because you're looking at it from a city perspective and areas around the city. So you don't have a particular anchor consumer. You don't have one thermal power, one gas plant or a fertilizer plant that is going to consume X MMS, X cubic meters of gas, which is, say, about 20% of your entire pipeline capacity at that point. So a lot of this demand is disaggregated. Therefore, there is also a potential that this is going to be an unviable model. If, for example, industries don't shift. Right now, your key sectors for city gas, where they will see a return on investment, are essentially industries and transport. With piped natural gas, the thing is, everyone has whoever has piped natural gas, the consumption is not very high. But the investment to connect that gas from the main pipeline to within your city, to within your house, is quite a lot. And also because you have to adjust, you have to have compressor stations at multiple points in time, because you cannot operate at the same pressure that an industry will operate, right? So the investment is very high, but the returns are not very high. Where will you see returns? You will see returns in industries and transport. If you do if you do manage to convince these consumers to shift to natural gas, then there is potential for city gas to be anchor consumer for gas, for the gas sector. But on the other hand, there are challenges, because it is not just about supply or infrastructure. There are alternate fuels that are in competition. A number of state governments are talking about electric vehicles. And where are they looking at electric vehicles? At buses, at public transport. Where is gas primarily consumed in a city like Delhi? In your CNG buses. If all of them are going to go electric, where is your major consumer going to go? Because that is one arm. Second, ride hailing cabs, which is again public transport, which are where again the government is trying to push these guys to go into electric. Plus, company strategy and savings on fuel is pushing a number of ride hailing cabs to go into electric. So there again, you're going to lose your market. Uh, you don't have, if you have electric, for passenger, for people like you and me, you have electric now, you have petrol, you have CNG. No points for guessing what you're actually going to go into. Today, it may still be petrol. Five years down the line, you may end up going into electric. But the number of consumers who will think about saying, oh, but I will have a CNG vehicle, will not be a lot, will not be a large chunk of the pie. Which is why I tell you, yes, it has the potential to be an anchor consumer, but it may also not be an anchor consumer.
Yeah, I was, thinking to ask you about this competition only because gas, it seems, has a very jinxed journey in India. It starts supplying to power sector, and suddenly the domestic supply goes away, and the gas power plants we all know are now stranded. Then it starts supplying to vehicles. CNG fleet comes in. Now there is electric mobility happening. So the good word is very much there. Before we get into the future of gas and gas-based economy,
Yeah.
just for the understanding, can you help understand what is like the per unit cost of petrol versus CNG versus electric, and also in cooking, what is the per unit cost when we compare PNG versus LPG? I think it would be an interesting number to know.
Okay, so if you look at it let's take households. Um, your subsidized cylinder is cheaper than PNG, but an unsubsidized cylinder is not cheaper than PNG. That is your ballpark, okay, for households. In petrol, diesel, and CNG is cheaper. The reason for this is because your taxes on petrol and diesel are incredibly high. And while natural gas is still not under the GST regime, it still competes very easily with, I think, your per kg cost is something like 50 or 54 rupees per kg. In comparison to where are we at petrol, I thought we had crossed 100. I think now we've come down to 93 or 94 rupees per liter. So that is your cost over there. When it comes to fuel oil and naphtha, because both of these other fuels are under GST, gas becomes uncompetitive. If gas goes under GST at say 5% rate, it will also then compete very easily with fuel oil and naphtha. But there is the complication that refineries that produce naphtha, India have to sell it because naphtha is a byproduct and you cannot tone down on naphtha. So because they make their margins on petrol and diesel, they can give naphtha at very low prices. So tomorrow, if a gas supplier tells that he will give you gas at X, the oil marketing companies can always give you naphtha at X minus 1. So, there is that pressure that is there. So that is to give a ballpark of where the pricing is.
And when compared to, let's compare CNG versus electric mobility. Is there any ballpark calculation there? EV versus CNG?
No, but this is something that I am actually in the process of doing, which I will be able to do tell you by the end of this month, because this is in relation to the city gas distribution question that Sandeep had asked earlier. So a large part of what I spoke about stems from the fact that this is a sector that needs more digging to understand its viability, and that is something I'm working on. So hopefully by the end of this month, I should have that going.
One thought that just occurred to me is, I mean, it's not a thought, but it's something, which is, I mean, I'm curious about, like, because we have supply side issues. I Could India have like tapped coal bed methane gas as a source? And I know that there were lots of rounds of policies and there were overlapping blocks where first coal ministry gives a block to a particular company and then the ONGC is also exploring the same block and all those issues. Could you talk a little bit about why coal bed methane as a gas source never took off in India? I think in US it's like 5 or 7% of their whole gas comes from that. So it's not nothing. So yeah, it'd be great if you can just talk a little bit about that.
Actually, you summarized that problem very, very well. It was basically two different ministries, and a lack of who takes ownership of it. Something similar with the EV vehicles, which we had seen for a long time, because you don't know who is the nodal ministry for electric vehicles. In fact, I'm not sure about it till date. Shreya, are you sure about it till date? Who is the nodal ministry for electric vehicles? It's
No
the same
idea.
problem. Who is the nodal ministry for CBM at the end of the day? Because it is coal, but then there is gas, and they are two separate ministries. So this confusion has not just impacted exploration, but like nobody wants to get into that space because there is no clarity on it. There's clarity on the pricing and all of that. There are rules to all of that. Okay, but in this awarding and implementation process is where there is always the hurdle.
One more last supply side question. I'm super interested in supply side. So
Yeah.
one more supply side question is, now all this talk about coal to gas, from Coal India and all these different agencies, would that have the potential to help with some of this gas, or is that we're talking about a completely different area?
There was India had experimented with syngas. There was one plant that was looking at syngas. Um, I mean, it could. I'm not saying it couldn't. And if it helps in increasing domestic supply, and it helps in, given coal prices are cheaper, um, it could be a good alternative to have in place. But I mean, I honestly have my doubts on it because your LNG prices are considerably lower right now, and are in the foreseeable future are expected to be not. I mean, they're not going to be very high because there is a lot of supply in the market. Um, and B, putting a coal to gas plant in place, the capex will be. I mean, you'll be putting in a lot of money on capex when you can just put all that money on purchasing LNG. In all honesty, plus if there are reforms on, given the push on removing the regulated non-regulated sector, quote unquote, given that. I don't see why an LNG can't compete in this space. So, given that, I mean, yes, there is potential for syngas, coal to gas in the country, but hard to believe anyone is going to put money to it currently. Because there are too many fuel options. Because in this budget we heard about a hydrogen mission, right? So now, so there's money going to go into that also. So there's only a small amount of money with a number of alternatives. So what is the opportunity cost of coal to gas right now in comparison to what would have been the opportunity cost for it, say, 15 years ago?
Let's come to demand side. We discussed a bit about it, that the anchor sectors are not there. In power especially, there's this very interesting case that gas faced, that you mentioned that it's a regulated sector and we could not afford to have costlier gas based power. But now we have this huge aggressive push to renewable, and now people are suddenly realizing and pointing out to the need of having a balancing power, which is usually hydro, pump storage hydro, or it's gas, or it's battery. Hydro, we know, comes with its own set of challenges. Battery, it's too costly, and Elon Musk just doesn't come to India. Why can't we? Why can't that happen? So gas is an option, but obviously there is no domestic supply. Do you see even a little bit of future for gas there? And I'm asking this because these gas guys keep asking for subsidy from Ministry of Power, and they keep not. The Ministry of Power just refuses to give them anything. So is there any possibility there? Let's start with power sector and then move on to the others.
Okay, so there is possibility, yes. The story of gas in India is the story of potential, Shreya. There is potential for it in every sector. Okay. So yes, there is possibility, but so there is a very interesting analysis that Dr. Rahul Tongia has done on this particular question for the book, for the natural gas book that will come out. You're talking about balancing. Okay, so the NREL report that looked at 175 gigawatts of renewables told us that for 175 gigawatts, we don't have to worry about balancing. Okay, now we're talking about 450 gigawatts of renewables. Alongside that, we have how much? 200 plus gigawatts of coal in the country, of which about 128 gigawatts is subcritical thermal power plants, which are very good for balancing and for flexibility. And CRC has already made the rule of sub 50% the critical factor, right? Now, where does gas fit into all this? You will need it for shorter periods of time when there is peak demand happening in the system. So what will be the role of gas then? Low volume, high value. Why do I say low volume, high value? And this is not my term, by the way. This is Dr. Togia's term, because this is a discussion that we've had quite a bit. Because given his research on the coal sector and my research on gas, this is a conversation we've had very frequently. You will need small amounts of gas for peaking. But this will be spread across the day. So during that particular time, your gas power plant will run at very high utilization factors. Utilization factor is essentially the rate at which your plant is expected to run and the rate at which it actually runs. So during that point in time, it will run at a very high utilization factor. It will meet that particular need and it will then stop or it will slow down again. So you will have some amount of gas that will be used. Now, the difference over here is if we get time of day pricing, because then what it will do is it will actually help these the generators to run those plants for that short period of time. Because otherwise it not in today's pricing for the power sector, for tariffs actually on the consumer end, it's very unviable to run these plants for these shorter durations. Right, so this is where the idea of low volume but high value comes from. If we start having time of day pricing, then it will be profitable to run gas plants for those periods of time with concentrated volumes. So therefore, gas has the potential to play a role in balancing. Again, potential, because I don't know what is happening on the time of day pricing side. So therefore, potential to play a role. Um, that is one part of it. The second part of it is, where does India go from here? Because eventually we are going to come to a point where we will need to start building new capacity. Right now, over the last 8 years, most of our capacity has been ones that have been sanctioned in late 2000s or early 2010, 11, 12, right? Um, you've not had sanctioning for new plants, barring on the renewable side of it. Um, so now the question comes for policymakers on, where are we going? Are we going to go into build more coal plants eventually? Particularly since the world is talking about net zero, is India going to go against the trend and build new coal plants, not the ones that are already under construction or under planning or implementation? Or is India going to say, oh, we'll go gas and we'll build more gas plants? The IEA in the India Energy Outlook believes that there is potential for India to build more gas power plants. But if you see any of the CEA documents until 2030, they don't tell you anything about a gas plant coming into being. They don't show any increase in capacity beyond 28 gigawatts. So if there's no signaling from the government, and it takes about 3 to 4 years for a gas power plant to set up and be commissioned. So if there's no signaling from the government, and if we need incremental capacity in, say, 2030, the signaling needs to happen now, so that there is a process to sanctioning, there's a process to setting it up, which means by 2026, at least the construction of the plant has to start happening. So until you have that policy signaling coming in saying, we do think that gas will continue in the power sector, I don't know. Or the other way to look at it, or the third way to look at it, is first you utilize this 28 gigawatts at like 80% capacity utilization factor, and then you think about building more plants. By the time that comes, we are in 2030. So you see my problem about gas in the power sector. Therefore, there's potential. There's a lot of potential.
I agree that there's a lot of potential in gas, but do you think this potential can be fueled by imported LNG? Do you think it's a viable idea for India to depend on imported LNG and power our power plants with that, given that we would need balancing power? So is it a feasible idea in this particular energy ecosystem?
See, imported or domestic doesn't matter, because we import 80% of our crude oil, and we import it from countries which are a lot more volatile. Gas, on the other hand, comes from countries which are not volatile. There's US, not volatile. There's Australia, definitely not volatile. There's Qatar, not volatile. So from a geopolitical perspective, importing gas is so much more better. Importing LNG is so much more better than importing crude oil. Whether you can use imported LNG in the power sector, sure. Can we look at it from today from a pricing perspective? Imported LNG in power sector, not viable, because we are still looking at merit order dispatches when we come to choosing which power to use. But once the reforms that are happening in the electricity sector actually go forward, there is a possibility that you can start using LNG in the gas sector, in the power sector again.
I'm sure you would know a bit about it. There is this now very interesting argument that is emerging in the sector, given that crude and gas involve so much of our forex outgo. There are voices now in the coal-based sector that India should rather focus on an electricity-based economy rather than having still the dream for a potential of gas-based economy, as you said. Do you think it is a possibility, especially keeping in mind the forex outgo and this recent, ambition of this government to be, Atmanirbhar, self-reliant, depending on their own natural resources. What do you think of this idea?
See, we will be electricity reliant. That's not happening in the next 10 years. That's not happening in the next 12, 15 years. Okay, the power sector will definitely be electricity reliant. It is already. But I'm saying other sectors that actually consume oil and gas will take a while to shift. And therefore, there is that window of about 15 years at the most. Okay. To my mind, there's a window of 15 years in all of these sectors for oil and gas to continue. That's one point of it. The second point of it, investments are already happening on the city gas distribution side. That is a tide you cannot now turn away from, right? The pace of investment may be slower, but investments are happening. So what are you going to do with all those investments if you suddenly start saying, oh, we will not use PNG, we'll use induction cook stoves? Which is also happening, by the way. There is a lot of proliferation of induction cook stoves, particularly in urban areas. But as Indians, we love to have different options available, which is fuel stacking in rural areas. In urban areas, we like to have options at our hand. So there is that possibility, but I'm saying investments have already begun. So there's no going back from there. Now, to become Atmanirbhar is not just about curbing forex, but it's also seeing that the viability of your current investments and your current companies happen. You cannot have any more stranded assets. You cannot have any more companies that are stressed. And at some point, the pressure on banks needs to stop. So there are multiple sides to being Atmanirbhar. It's not just about controlling the resource, but it's also about seeing that the resources that we have in hand are efficiently managed and utilized. That's how I see the role of gas versus electrification.
You mentioned city gas distribution. In the recent years, city gas distribution has seen a fair bit of private participation, and some big names have entered into that space. I just want to understand from you are we looking at a vibrant business in city gas distribution where there are leading names and multiple suppliers with, the consumer having choice? This is something that the government has been dreaming about in the power sector, but in city gas distribution, it seems like it's becoming a reality. Is it becoming a reality?
What do you mean by consumers having choice? Are you talking about having multiple choices in one geographical area? That's not happening, because the rules of city gas basically say that for 8 years, in a particular geography, the person who's won the bid will be the person who will be the only operator in that. It's only post 8 years that other players are allowed to enter the market. Okay. But there has been a lot of interest on the city gas side. You do have a lot of big players coming into the market who have come into the market. The progress of this, honestly, Shreya, can be seen only in the next 1 or 2 years, because the 9th and the 10th bidding round have just happened. Okay. I'm discounting 2020 completely because COVID disrupted all plans. So technically, which basically means if I discard 2020 from our calendar, the 9th bidding round has just happened last year, right? So from that perspective, it is going to take at least the next 2-3 years for us to get a sense on how the city gas networks are functioning, to get a sense of whether the investments that were planned are actually being put down or not. Because land is being bought in multiple places, especially it's not just the private place. There is quite a bit of movement on the public sector side of it, because a lot of the state the state public sector units who entered the bidding have gone about buying land, have gone about negotiating for the entire pipeline grid, etc., etc. So there is movement happening quite rapidly on the front. But in terms of real numbers, I think we will have to wait for at least 2-3 years. Given 2020, I'm discarding that.
So, just a follow up, very quick follow up to that is, I'm wondering like which cities in India are really taking the lead in the city gas distribution networks. Like, I know that Delhi had some plans, but can you talk about any other places?
No, see, Delhi, Bombay already had city gas grids from like late 2000s, right? Delhi because of the Supreme Court order, Mumbai because of pollution. So Delhi, Mumbai always had this. Bangalore is another place where the plan has been put in place and things are moving forward. But if you actually see the geographical areas and the distribution under city gas, you'll realize it's not your major metros. It's essentially your tier one towns. Okay, so Lucknow, Varanasi. These are the areas where you are seeing a lot more development. So it's not even metros. So metro is where this thing is coming. What remains to be seen is the demand in these tier one cities will be the same as the demand in, say, a Delhi or a Mumbai.
So, as the world is sort of now worried about climate change, and obviously it seems harder and harder to meet 1.5-degree targets, one of the things that people talk about is, if you build any new fossil fuel infrastructure, be it gas, be it coal, they're going to stay for, a few decades. And that means our trajectory to meet 1.5 or even 2 will become even harder. So from that perspective, the whole talk about gas-based economy in India would would I mean, and the fact that India is not able to supply its own gas and will need to import LNG, um, would that incentivize international players as well to keep building LNG facilities, to keep pumping gas, and for India to keep continuing? So basically, I'm rambling at this point, but what I'm trying to ask is, like, how does that take, where does that take the global climate targets if we still talk about gas-based economy?
Okay, there are three parts to your question, by the way. Let's tackle each. Okay. First, from an LNG perspective, India is a very interesting market for most suppliers across the world because we are the second largest importer of LNG, second or third largest importer of LNG. But and let's look at some numbers. Okay. Projected demand by different organizations and people. So IEA says under different scenarios, says gas demand can go up to about 132 billion cubic meters. Today we are at 64 billion cubic meters. Okay, this is 2030. Petronet LNG says 119 billion cubic meters by 2030. So let's take a ballpark of say between 130 to 140. Okay. Of this 130 to 140, your domestic production today is 30 billion cubic meters. Let us assume that your Eastern Offshore comes into the new fields that ONGC has explored, starts production, takes this capacity to about 45 billion cubic meters, which means 60% is still being imported, right? So that presents a very lucrative market for almost every oil and gas company globally, every supplier globally. Given that, you have seen a number of investments in the oil and gas sector in India in the last 3-4 years. Exxon, Total, Shell, BP were already in the country, but they've also ramped up their investment. Uh, 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 what is Tellurian? Okay. Um, so a number of these guys have come into the country because India presents a very lucrative opportunity for them to put gas inside. This is your question on LNG, imported LNG in the country. So to sum it up, we will see increasing imports of LNG if we continue, given that we are putting infrastructure in place to consume gas. Now let's address the climate side of it. Will we meet our targets? I mean, given that India's per capita CO2 emission is one of the lowest in the world, I am not even going into whether India will meet its. We will meet our commitments. Okay, we will definitely meet our commitments. Even when we enhance it, we still have room to meet our commitments. That's not the problem. Uh, the question is, you have already put this infrastructure, or you are in the process of putting this infrastructure in place. So from a domestic perspective, are you going to not utilize this infrastructure, or go leave it stranded, stressed, etc., or are you going to go utilize this infrastructure until 2040, 2045, which is also, by the way, the timeline when most of our newer coal plants, which were built in 2016-17, are about to expire. So it gives us that amount of leeway to recoup the money, to put in the investment, to utilize these plants, and look at how to transition away from all of this. In the process, will we meet the global 2-degree targets? That is something that has to be done not just by India but by a bunch of other countries. So that I think there needs to be a separation on trying to meet our international commitments and our domestic commitments. I think we are decently doing both at this stage.
Excellent. So I think I have one last question.
Okay.
What would be your gas vision for India? I know that PM has a gas-based economy vision, and what would be your gas-based vision? What kind of role would you like gas as a fuel to play in the next 20, 30 years till all fossil fuels perhaps go down?
Honestly, there are two sectors. One, I would really like gas to come back in the power sector, um, because I think it is clean. I like, we all know it is cleaner. And if you're anyway going to increase tariffs, then might as well as do it in a more cleaner fashion. So I would honestly like gas to come back to the power sector. Uh, And I think we need to start talking about LNG in long distance freight, because there is conversation about battery related long distance freight. Yes, but it is still a work in progress. LNG long distance freight is a concept that is that has been commercially applicable in different parts of the world already. China is one of the biggest examples of LNG long distance freight. What do we need in this? We basically need to have a supply chain in place for supplying the LNG, and for OEMs to start looking at production. OEMs themselves don't have a problem unless the government, their only hurdle is policy signaling at the end of the day. So I think that presents a very good opportunity for gas in the country for the next 15 years for sure. 15, 18 years for sure. And the gestation period won't be, like, it's not about laying down infrastructure, pipelines, because those are already done. Highways already are there in place. Trucks are already operating in place. A lot of these moving parts are already there. So that's my second go-to sector for gas. My third go-to sector would be MSME, because I think that MSME sectors will need to shift, but it's a close call between renewables and gas at this point, to be quite honest. Uh, I would hope that they shift to gas in the short term and convert to renewables over the next 10 years. But I think MSMEs will go down the renewable energy way. So, but currently, power and LNG long distance freight are very viable options for gas. And fertilizer. Actually, fertilizer already exists in the country. But the reason I haven't spoken much about fertilizer is because there you don't have any other choice, and so fertilizer demand is going to continue. That's the only reason I haven't spoken much about fertilizer.
Great. So, I mean, it seems that there have been a lot of challenges, and you nicely explained on all the challenges and all the policy issues surrounding the sector. And sounds like there is still some gas for the gas sector going forward. Uh, so, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. See you.
Thank you.
For more information about the podcast, visit us online at www.101reporters.com/podcast/the_India_energy_hour. You can also reach out to us on social media and send us your comments and suggestions. My Twitter handle is at Sandeep Pai with a double I, and Shreya's Twitter handle is at Shreya_J.